It's not every day that you see an ESPN analyst get completely dismantled on live television. And let's be clear, this wasn't your average sports debate. What happened in that studio wasn't just about football, it wasn't just about Arch Manning, and it certainly wasn't just about Shedeur Sanders. This was about the way the media creates stars, protects narratives, and tears down players they don't want to succeed. And in the middle of it all stood Ryan Clark, refusing to let one more lazy take slide past without a fight. Now the debate began simple enough. Is Arch Manning a generational quarterback talent? Former NFL quarterback Dan Orlovsky didn't even hesitate. He jumped in with a confident 100%. No pause, no nuance, no acknowledgement of how little we've actually seen from Arch. Just blind commitment to the hype train. But that's where things started to turn. Because Ryan Clark wasn't buying it. Not for a second. You could see it in his face. You could hear it in his tone. He wasn't about to let Orlovsky sit there and sell the idea that 3 career starts and some GPS speed readings suddenly made someone generational. Clark leaned in, his voice sharp, his words cutting right through the noise. And in that moment, the entire conversation shifted. This wasn't just about Arch Manning anymore. It was about credibility. It was about bias. And it was about the way quarterbacks like Shedeur Sanders keep getting buried under narratives that were never built on facts in the first place. And here's the thing. Ryan Clark didn't have to mention Shedeur's name right away for the message to hit home. Every viewer who's been paying attention to college football knew exactly what he was doing. He was standing up for the players who have earned it, the guys who have produced, who have performed under pressure, who have proven it on the field, yet still don't get the respect they deserve. And by the time Clark dropped his now iconic line about that little vest you wear on top of your nipples, Orlovsky wasn't just losing an argument. He was losing the entire foundation of his credibility as an analyst. Think about it, in less than 2 minutes, Ryan Clark exposed the entire system for what it is. A cycle where certain quarterbacks are propped up because of their last name, their family history, or the story the media wants to tell. Meanwhile, guys like Shedeur Sanders are nitpicked, doubted, and forced to prove themselves twice over, no matter how much they've already shown. That's why this moment matters, because it wasn't just Clark calling out one bad take. It was Clark exposing how those takes shape careers, shape perceptions, and shape legacies. And the best part? This clash wasn't scripted, it wasn't planned. It was raw, it was real, and it was exactly the kind of unfiltered honesty that fans have been waiting for. So what really went down in that studio? And why did one bold stand from Ryan Clark feel like the entire media machine just got flipped upside down? The spark that lit this entire showdown came from one simple question. Is Arch Manning a generational talent? It's the kind of debate you expect on ESPN, a big-name prospect, a famous family, and analysts ready to give their 2 cents. But the way Dan Orlovsky answered it, that's what turned a casual conversation into a full-blown clash. Without hesitation, without even taking a second to consider the weight of his words, Orlovsky blurted out, 100%. Generational. Guaranteed. Case closed. In his mind, the discussion was already over. But in that instant, he had no idea he'd just set himself up for one of the most embarrassing reality checks of his career. Because Ryan Clark wasn't about to let that slide. Not today. Not when generational talent actually means something in football circles. Clark leaned forward, his eyes locked in, ready to cut through the noise. And the first thing he attacked was the lazy way the word was being thrown around. Arch Manning might be talented, sure, but to call him generational after 3 career starts, after showing flashes but nothing close to undeniable dominance, that wasn't analysis, that was hype. And Clark was about to tear it down piece by piece. Here's the problem, and Clark knew it. Throwing around terms like generational isn't harmless. It shapes expectations. It cements reputations. It creates narratives that can follow players for years. And more importantly, it cheapens the meaning of the word for the players who actually earned it. Think about Trevor Lawrence. Think about Caleb Williams. Think about Lamar Jackson. These guys didn't just have good measurables or a famous last name. They forced their way onto the field, even when established veterans were standing in their way. That's what true generational talent looks like. And that's exactly why Clark wasn't buying what Orlovsky was selling. But here, where it got interesting, Clark didn't just disagree. He went for the credibility. He cut straight into Orlovsky's argument, questioning why measurables like GPS speed or 40-yard dash times were suddenly more important than actual results on the field. "We don't have to play a miles-per-hour game," Clark fired back, drawing a sharp contrast between Arch's raw numbers and the real dominance of guys like Lamar Jackson running wild against SEC defenses. And then came the line that instantly went viral. "I don't care what this little vest you wear on top of your nipples says." In one stroke, Clark mocked the over-reliance on analytics, stripped the argument of its false authority, and turned Orlovsky's own data-driven style against him. That was the spark. A debate that started with Arch Manning's hype had just transformed into something bigger. It wasn't about one prospect anymore. It was about how the media evaluates quarterbacks, who gets labeled as elite, and who gets left out of the conversation. And while Orlovsky was still trying to justify his take, Ryan Clark had already shifted the battlefield. Because this wasn't about Arch Manning. This was about Shedeur Sanders. The moment Ryan Clark pushed back, the cracks in Dan Orlovsky's argument started to show. And the truth is, it didn't take much pressure for those cracks to widen into gaping holes. Because let's be honest, when it comes to quarterback evaluations, Orlovsky's track record has never exactly screamed expert. Think about who we're talking about here. Dan Orlovsky, a career backup in the NFL, best remembered for running out of the back of the end zone during a live play. That's the image most fans have of his career. Yet somehow, he's carved out a second life as ESPN's quarterback authority. The irony: the guy who never proved he belonged among the NFL's elite now gets paid to decide who does. And Ryan Clark was not afraid to call that out, whether directly or indirectly. Because here, what Clark understood, analysts like Orlovsky often project their own careers onto the players they cover. Mediocre players protect mediocre players. They relate to them. They see themselves in the so-called grinders who flash just enough potential to stay relevant. And when they come across a player who doesn't fit that mold, a player like Shedeur Sanders, who makes NFL throws, commands leadership, and raises the level of every team he's on, suddenly the narrative shifts. Suddenly, the goalposts move. That's why Orlovsky was so quick to anoint Arch Manning as generational. Not because Arch has actually earned it, but because the media machine was already primed to hand it to him. Famous last name, solid measurables, a background story that sells. That's the perfect package for someone like Orlovsky to hype up, even if the on-field proof isn't there yet. But Clark wasn't letting him off the hook. He challenged the obsession with numbers, Arch's speed, his size, his 40 time, and reminded everyone watching that none of that equates to true generational dominance. More importantly, Clark exposed how shallow Orlovsky's evaluations really were. If all it takes is a few data points and a well-known surname to earn generational status, then what are we even doing? What does the word even mean anymore? And then came the body shot that had Orlovsky reeling. Clark framed the conversation around results, not projections, not wishful thinking, results. Arch Manning hasn't forced a coach to bench a starter. He hasn't taken over a program on his own. He hasn't delivered on the field in a way that leaves no doubt. Meanwhile, Shedeur Sanders has been doing exactly that for years, first at Jackson State, then at Colorado. Clark didn't even need to say Shedeur's name outright. Everyone watching knew exactly who he was talking about. In that moment, Orlovsky's flaws weren't just exposed, they were magnified. His tendency to lean on hype instead of substance, his habit of downplaying proven production while inflating untested potential, his bias toward storylines instead of reality. Ryan Clark wasn't just winning an argument. He was dismantling the very foundation of Orlovsky's credibility. And the best part, the real takedown hadn't even started yet. The real sting in Ryan Clark's words wasn't just that he challenged Dan Orlovsky's take. It was that he pulled back the curtain on a much bigger problem. The truth is, Orlovsky's Arch Manning hype wasn't an isolated incident. It was just another example of a system that constantly shifts the spotlight toward certain players while nitpicking others to death. And if you've been paying attention, you already know exactly who usually gets left out. Look at how the media has treated Shedeur Sanders compared to Arch Manning. Shedeur walked into Jackson State and instantly elevated the program. He transferred to Colorado, and in one season, he turned a program that had been a national punchline into must-watch television. The numbers were there. The clutch performances were there. The leadership was there. Everything you'd want to see in a quarterback proving himself on the big stage. And yet, what did the media focus on? Nitpicks. Protection issues, play calling debates, anything they could use to chip away at his accomplishments. Now flip it. Arch Manning has barely touched the field. 3 career starts, a small sample size, and suddenly he's the next Peyton or Eli, not because he's earned it, but because of his last name. ESPN can't stop running features. Analysts can't stop labeling him generational. Every throw, every highlight, every minor flash gets magnified and praised. The standards couldn't be more different, and Ryan Clark wasn't afraid to call it out. And this isn't just about Arch versus Shedeur. It's a pattern. The media loves a good bloodline story, Manning, Lawrence, even Quinn Ewers to a degree. They thrive on narratives that sell, even if the actual performance doesn't back it up yet. Meanwhile, players who don't fit the mold, who don't have the family name or the media-friendly backstory, have to be flawless just to be noticed. One mistake, one bad game, and it becomes the headline. That's the double standard Ryan Clark exposed in real time. Arch Manning can sit behind Quinn Ewers for years and still get hyped as the future of football. But if Shedeur Sanders doesn't light up every single game, suddenly the narrative shifts to whether he's overrated or not ready. Arch gets praised for potential. Shedeur gets criticized for expectations. And Clark was done letting that slide. The irony is that Shedeur has shown more signs of being generational than Arch ever has. He's proven he can carry a program, win under pressure, and make throws that belong on Sundays. But instead of celebrating that, the conversation always seems to shift to someone else. That's what Clark was really fighting against, not just one bad take, but a media ecosystem built on uneven standards. And as sharp as Clark's critique was in that moment, he wasn't even finished yet. Because next, he was about to redefine what the word generational should actually mean. When Ryan Clark finally started redefining what generational talent actually means, he didn't just challenge Orlovsky, he flipped the conversation entirely. Because here's the reality. Too often, analysts throw around buzzwords like generational based on measurables, a last name, or hype, without looking at what actually defines elite performance. And Clark made it crystal clear that real generational talent isn't about flash. It's about impact, leadership, and the ability to force the game to change around you. Clark's examples cut deep. Trevor Lawrence didn't wait for opportunities, he took them. Caleb Williams didn't sit behind a starter for 2 years, politely asking for reps. Lamar Jackson didn't just impress scouts with speed and agility, he forced defenses to adapt and coaches to rethink strategy. That's the hallmark of a quarterback who is truly generational, the kind of player who reshapes every environment he enters. And that's the standard Clark used to evaluate Arch Manning versus Shedeur Sanders, even without nomming Shedeur outright yet. Then he turned the spotlight on Shedeur. The proof was undeniable. Wherever Shedeur goes, transformation follows. Jackson State became a contender the moment he stepped on campus. Colorado, previously at the bottom, became relevant and exciting in a single season under his leadership. And it wasn't just the wins. It was his poise under pressure, his ability to make throws NFL scouts drool over, and his leadership skills that commanded respect from teammates years older and more experienced. That's what separates hype from history, action, not projections. Clark didn't stop at praising accomplishments. He dismantled the false equivalencies that analysts like Orlovsky often rely on. Arch Manning's few starts were being treated as proof of greatness, while Shedeur's years of elite play were dismissed as unproven because they didn't fit the narrative. Clark exposed the bias, showing that true generational talent isn't measured by sample size or media attention. It's measured by the ability to elevate a program, to force coaches to make decisions, and to consistently perform when the stakes are highest. And just when it seemed like the audience had fully grasped the argument, Clark delivered the knockout logic. Generational quarterbacks don't wait their turn. They force the opportunity, they create the spotlight, and they leave no question in anyone's mind. Caleb Williams taking the job midseason from Spencer Rattler. That's generational. Shedeur transforming two different programs and performing under the brightest lights. That's generational. Arch Manning sitting behind a starter for 2 years. That's not proof, that's potential. By the end of this segment, the point was clear. The term generational had been misused for hype purposes, and Clark wasn't having it. Real talent commands respect, creates change, and proves itself on the field, not just in stat sheets or bloodline expectations. And through this lens, Shedeur Sanders wasn't just deserving of recognition. He exemplified everything the word generational should represent. The stage was set. The definitions had been rewritten. And what came next? Clark was about to land the blow that left Orlovsky exposed for good, calling into question his entire credibility as a quarterback analyst. The moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. Ryan Clark wasn't just debating a point anymore. He was delivering a knockout that left Dan Orlovsky scrambling for credibility. It was the kind of live TV moment that instantly goes viral, the kind of exchange that makes fans lean closer to the screen because they know they're witnessing something rare. Someone standing up to the hype machine and calling it exactly what it is. It started with Clark systematically breaking down Orlovsky's entire approach to quarterback analysis. Orlovsky had been hyping Arch Manning based on measurables and 3 starts, calling him generational without pause. Clark didn't just disagree, he dismantled the foundation of that argument. He pointed out that metrics like 40-yard dash times, GPS speeds, and height are meaningless if a quarterback can't consistently perform at a high level, command a team, or make decisions under pressure. In short, Clark made it painfully clear that hype does not equal talent.
If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button.
Then came the famous line that will be remembered in sports media history. "I don't care what this little vest you wear on top of your nipples says." It was more than a punchline. It was a metaphorical checkmate. Clark was saying, all your fancy analytics, all your numbers, mean nothing if you can't evaluate real football performance. The jab was sharp, witty, and devastating. Orlovsky's face told the story. He knew he had been exposed, and there was no easy way out. Clark didn't stop there. He brought in examples of true generational quarterbacks, Trevor Lawrence, Caleb Williams, Lamar Jackson. These weren't kids with potential. They were players who forced coaches to make immediate decisions, who didn't wait their turn, who transformed programs instantly. Clark contrasted that with Arch Manning's 3 starts and Shedeur Sanders' years of elite production. The message was clear. If you're calling Arch generational after a handful of games, what does that say about your credibility when evaluating a proven player like Shedeur? And that's when the impact of the moment hit home. Clark didn't just defend Shedeur. He exposed the flawed logic that allows mediocre analysts to shape narratives about elite talent. Orlovsky's blind hype, his over-reliance on numbers, his inability to see proven production, all of it was laid bare in front of millions. Clark made a bigger point. The system that rewards hype and punishes results is broken, and it takes someone willing to call it out to restore balance. The studio audience and fans watching at home could feel the shift. This wasn't just a debate. This was a public execution of lazy analysis. Orlovsky, flustered and attempting to backtrack, had no answer. Every example Clark threw out, every piece of logic he used, chipped away at Orlovsky's credibility until it was practically gone. The takeaway was impossible to ignore. Ryan Clark wasn't just making a point about one player. He was redefining what it means to evaluate talent honestly, and showing the world why Shedeur Sanders deserves the recognition he's been denied. By the time Clark leaned back, the damage was done. The knockouts weren't punches to the ego. They were lessons in accountability, fairness, and respect for actual performance. Orlovsky had been exposed, the media double standards highlighted, and fans everywhere were left nodding in agreement. This was a moment that would echo through college football debates for years to come. The brilliance of Ryan Clark's argument didn't stop at knocking down one analyst. What he revealed was far bigger, a systemic issue in sports media that shapes careers, narratives, and fan perception in ways most people don't even realize. Because the truth is, analysts like Dan Orlovsky aren't just giving opinions. They're gatekeepers. They decide which quarterbacks get the hype, which get overlooked, and which get buried under unfair criticism. Look at how this plays out. Shedeur Sanders comes into a program and immediately changes the trajectory of a team. He elevates the culture, delivers under pressure, and produces numbers that would make NFL scouts take notice. Yet the media finds ways to minimize it. Analysts dissect his technique, overemphasize minor mistakes, and keep the narrative focused on what he hasn't done rather than what he has. Meanwhile, Arch Manning has 3 career starts, barely a chance to prove himself, and the hype machine crowns him generational. That's the gap Ryan Clark exposed, and the bias isn't subtle. Clark's insight highlights a bigger truth. Media narratives are built on perception, not performance. Family names, bloodlines, and storylines often outweigh actual on-field accomplishments. It's convenient. It sells stories. It feeds fan excitement. But for players like Shedeur, it's a double-edged sword. No matter how well they perform, no matter how many programs they transform, their accomplishments are often underplayed because they don't fit the narrative the media wants to push. Clark wasn't just pointing out a flaw in Orlovsky's take. He was pointing out a flaw in the system itself. And the consequences are real. Players who get overlooked may struggle to receive the attention they deserve from scouts, fans, and even future analysts. Their potential impact on the game is minimized in the public eye. They're forced to work harder, prove more, and overcome biases that have nothing to do with talent. That's why Clark's defense of proper evaluation matters so much. By publicly calling out the double standards, he's not just defending Shedeur Sanders. He's advocating for fairness and integrity in how talent is judged. Clark's message also resonates beyond the individual. He showed that the way we talk about quarterbacks, the way we hype some and dismiss others, affects how we understand the game itself. Media narratives have power. They shape expectations. They influence perception. And when those narratives are based on bias, hype, or bloodlines rather than proven ability, the result is a skewed conversation where true talent can be ignored or diminished. Ultimately, Ryan Clark's intervention reminds fans and analysts alike that evaluation isn't just about numbers or family pedigree. It's about results, leadership, and the ability to perform when it matters most. And in a world where media narratives often overshadow reality, that reminder is more necessary than ever. By exposing the biases and calling out lazy analysis, Clark not only defended Shedeur Sanders, he sparked a conversation about fairness, credibility, and respect in sports media that fans and players alike won't forget anytime soon. By the time the debate ended, it was clear that Ryan Clark hadn't just defended a single player, he had exposed an entire system. What unfolded on live television wasn't just about Arch Manning or Shedeur Sanders. It was a masterclass in calling out bias, correcting flawed analysis, and reminding everyone what truly matters when evaluating talent. Because at the end of the day, numbers, measurables, and hype only mean so much. Results on the field, leadership, and the ability to impact a program instantly are what define greatness. And Clark made that undeniable. Shedeur Sanders has consistently proven that he possesses everything a generational quarterback should have: poise under pressure, arm talent NFL scouts drool over, leadership that commands respect from older, more experienced teammates, and the ability to elevate every team he joins. Yet for years, analysts like Orlovsky and others have found ways to diminish his accomplishments. Ryan Clark's moment on ESPN was more than just a defense. It was a challenge to the entire media narrative that allows hype, bloodlines, and storylines to overshadow actual performance. What makes this even more remarkable is how effortless Clark made it seem. He didn't need to attack Shedeur directly or exaggerate claims. Instead, he dismantled the foundation of lazy analysis, exposed double standards, and reminded viewers why true talent cannot be ignored. Orlovsky's over-reliance on numbers, his blind hype for a player with minimal experience, and his tendency to nitpick proven performers all collapsed under Clark's scrutiny. And the audience could see it. Credibility matters, and when it's exposed like that, it resonates with everyone watching. This moment is also a wake-up call for fans and analysts alike. It's a reminder that narratives are powerful, but they are not always accurate. Generational talent is not measured in sample sizes or by family pedigree. It's measured by the ability to transform teams, perform when it counts, and consistently deliver under pressure. Shedeur Sanders has done exactly that at every level, and yet, recognition has been slow to follow. Clark reminded the world that ignoring that reality does a disservice not only to the player, but to the integrity of football evaluation itself. And here's the final takeaway. Moments like this don't just happen in a vacuum. They set the standard for how we talk about athletes, how analysts form opinions, and how fans perceive talent. When someone with credibility, experience, and courage calls out flawed logic in real time, it forces a broader conversation. It forces fairness. It forces respect. And it ensures that players like Shedeur Sanders finally get the recognition they deserve, based on their accomplishments rather than the narratives built around others. So when you look back at that exchange, remember this. Clark didn't just destroy a bad take. He challenged an entire system. He reminded the world what generational talent actually means. And he proved that sometimes it takes one person willing to speak the truth to set the record straight. For Shedeur Sanders, for fans, and for the integrity of sports analysis, this was a moment that will not be forgotten.
If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow and lets us know you love this kind of content. And hey, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with your friends, your group chats, or anyone who loves football as much as you do. The more the conversation spreads, the better it gets. Most importantly, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss when we drop fresh stories, wild rumors, or breaking updates that the mainstream media won't talk about.